What's up, everybody? Just went live on Mythic Conversations. Just waiting a few minutes for everyone to start joining. Always the beginning of the show, that's kind of what happens. Because this is originally broadcast live on Facebook on the Mythic Legions Cabal channel, it always takes a little bit of time for people to start jumping on board and the show to really get started. But I can see that we've got a few people joining now. Travis and Chris, thank you for joining. Hello, welcome to another episode. Give a few minutes as people start joining. Michael, nice to see you. Hey Chris, how you doing tonight? Thanks for jumping on board. Jay, thanks for jumping on. Give everyone a few more minutes to get started. Get on to the show and then we'll kick it off. Pretty excited for tonight. I'm excited for my new setup. I did a little test last night. For those of you who may have logged on, you may have seen me go live last night around 9 o'clock or something, and I know a bunch of people were probably like, what the heck's going on? It's not Wednesday night, but I was just testing out some new equipment you're seeing tonight. I got a new camera set up, pretty excited about that. Definitely wanted to upgrade the look of the show, wanted to make sure that what I was showing looked better. So I work for an IT company and we've got a video studio, so I borrowed some equipment and I'm pretty excited for how it's looking so far. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the audio sufficient? Give me a little yes or no in the comments, that'll be helpful. Just want to make sure that the audio level is where it needs to be. But to get started, like every Wednesday, thank you for joining. This is Mythic Conversations. If you are tuning in for the first time, or if you are catching this on the replay on, say, YouTube, and you are not familiar with the show, you don't know who I am, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Gerard. I'm a Mythic Legions collector and customizer. I also have the distinct privilege of working as the digital marketing manager for Four Horsemen Studios, where I get to be in charge of everything at sourcehorseman.com. If you want to check out some of my work and some of my Mythic Legions customizations, you can do so on Instagram. On Instagram, I post as Mythic Customs, all one word. My website is also mythiccustoms.com. All of my customs, including everything we're going to look at tonight, get reposted to my website along with a ton of pictures, full recipes for how you can make some of these yourself. Pretty much anything I do, those are where you can find me. And of course, you can find me here every Wednesday night at 7:30 for this show, Mythic Conversations. And this show, it's obviously a Mythic Legions show. You know, we start every week talking a little bit about what's going on in Mythic Legions news. And then because the way that I really approach Mythic Legions is as a customizer, every week I have a specific topic centered around Mythic Legions customs that I think is interesting, that I think people will want to know about. So that's what we do as well. And as always, because this is a live show, at least the initial broadcast that we're doing right now is a live show, there is some back and forth. If you have questions for me, you hit me up in the comments. That's why this is called Mythic Conversations, because I want to have a conversation with you. I want to know what you're thinking about. I want to respond to your questions. So that's pretty much the intro. Drew, nice to have you here. Jay, finally got to catch it live. Anthony, nice to see you here. You got Tony and everybody over there watching. You gonna stay up tonight, bud? Family affair for those guys. Happy to see that. Travis. Awesome. Everyone's saying the audio sounds good. Leland, Jennifer, thank you very much for joining. So the audio sounds good. The video quality is much improved over previous episodes. I'm super excited. Not a ton going on in Mythic Legions news right now, although if you did see Four Horsemen, they posted a little teaser today, which is pretty cool because Zombie 13, a number of weeks ago now, well over a month ago, he started something on Wednesdays that he calls What's on the Desk Wednesday. Basically encouraging customizers to kind of post a picture of what they're working on at that time. I did it the first week. I have such a plan for what I'm going to post, and actually a lot of times the stuff I post ties directly into the show that I'm doing that night, so I tend not to show a lot of my in-progress stuff. But the Horsemen, pretty cool. They posted something today on Instagram, which I know has been reshared in the Cabal, that and they used that What's on the Desk Wednesday for a little kind of behind-the-scenes type look at a new armor piece that they had in the studio, and people are excited about that. A lot of people asking what scale it is, whether or not it's ogre scale. I can't say whether or not it's ogre scale, but it's pretty cool, and I know that people are super excited to see there is stuff going on. Remember, last week on this show, I had just come back from my trip to Four Horsemen Studios, and I told everybody, be prepared. Anyone who's worried that there's not stuff going on, rest assured there's a ton of cool stuff coming. So it was very cool to see them post that today and to give everyone a little teaser. Yeah, Chris is actually mentioning that same thing. If people saw the post and Zombie talking, he's got the tag on there. Yeah, if you do want to participate in that, if you are doing customs and you want to participate in that What's on the Desk Wednesday, check in the comments. Zombie just posted the tags that he used, which is pretty cool. Outside of that, again, there's not a ton going on in the world of Mythic Legions. Did want to mention the shirt pre-order. So if you checked on Monday here in the Cabal, I actually set it up as an announcement. We posted the announcement that we are doing a pre-order, a second run for the Slayer-inspired Cabal design t-shirts. A ton of people have requested us to do that. Not a ton of people have pre-ordered yet, so it's only a 2-week window. You still got some time. It only opened up on Monday. You've got until next Sunday, but don't wait till the last minute. I'm the one taking all these pre-orders, so it's tougher on me if you wait to the last minute to place that order. But those shirts are available. They're going to come in the original black and a new blood red color for it. Super cool. Anyone that has the original shirts can attest to the fact that they're super nice quality. They're like the nice soft material that a lot of shirts come with these days. So they look great. The print came out really, really nice. We don't know if we're going to do a third run, so jump on that now. They're $25 shipped in the US for sizes small through extra large. If you want slightly bigger sizes, which, let's be honest, a lot of toy fans need the bigger sizes. It's just a fact of life. Any size 2X and above is $3 more, so those are $28. And then overseas, I am happy to ship overseas. Typically, it's about an extra $20. I've got a number of orders overseas already, and when I did the calculations, when I looked it up on the shipping price calculator, it came to like 20 extra bucks. So I'll give you those accordingly. But you can just reach out to me, message me right through the Cabal. Don't leave a comment or something in the post. I don't check those for orders. Message me directly, and I'll be happy to get you all set up with the ordering information you need. There is another shirt coming. You saw that. Walter also posted a teaser picture of the next shirt, whose design was done by the same artist that did the Slayer one. We ended up going with another music-inspired kind of design. Those are fun. They're just enjoyable to do. There's that recognizability aspect of it, which is ironically something we're going to talk about tonight with the customizing topic. But that recognizability, that's kind of a cool thing. It makes the shirts a little more appealing. So we did a Motorhead-inspired design, but instead of the beast that's normally there, the artist did like an orc head. It's basically like a screaming orc, but it's still got the big tusks, and then the bone-handled orc sword that came in one of the weapons packs, the Dark Forces weapons pack, but it also came with like the Fury Orc. There's across those, and it says Cabal and then on the banner it says above all. So it's a super cool design. Those will be offered down the road, but for now we've got the Slayer inspired design, so hit me up if you want one of those. So tonight's topic, tonight's going to be less about, some of the weeks I do this, it's very tutorial based, where I show kind of a technique, I show a tip or something I'm doing. Tonight's going to be a lot more kind of design theory, kind of talking you through my process, which I mentioned this, I did a little bit of this last week, and I mentioned that I personally love hearing creators talk about their process. I love just kind of delving into that aspect of the creative process, of the design process. That's fascinating to me. So I hope that you'll enjoy that as well. I certainly like talking about it as much as I like listening to it. So hopefully you'll enjoy that as well tonight, because I specifically wanted to talk about the idea of creating tribute figures. And I mean, let's be honest, the first tribute figures in Mythic Legions were officially parts of the line. Back in the Mythic Legions 1.5 wave, they did the Unkin figure, which was, a tribute to kind of man-at-arms. It was an orc in the man-at-arms, the Motu man-at-arms type colors. And that was the first time that we saw really a very tribute figure, a figure that was created intentionally to pay homage to something else. Since then, clearly, we've got a number of other Motu figures. They debut at PowerCon. We just saw a couple of them that made their debut in the All-Stars 3 wave, the Lord Dragul and the Darina Onerous. Super cool figures. And creating tribute figures is actually something I genuinely enjoy doing for a number of reasons. Number one, they are, quite frankly, some of the most popular pieces that I post on my accounts. And I think that's because, as I was talking about with the t-shirts, it's that recognizability aspect. It's kind of like the toy collection as a whole. So, as you can see behind me, the bulk of my collection is Mythic Legions. When toy fans come and see the collection, they're fascinated by Mythic Legions, because, I mean, if they know what Mythic Legions are, they're fascinated by just the scope of what I have. But if they're not Mythic Legions fans, but they're toy fans, they clearly love the quality of those figures. That really speaks to them. But if they're not toy fans, what's interesting is, because they don't recognize these toys as being from a property that they're familiar with, it doesn't jump out at them. Actually, when anyone who's not a toy fan comes to my collection, the number one thing they respond to, it's in the other room. If you check out the tour that I did of this room, in the other room I have a whole one of these Detolf display cases of Muppets figures, an older line by Palisades. And they're super cool. It's a cool display because it is also so expansive. It's a whole Detolf full. And people immediately, they recognize the Muppets. It's a big collection. It's a lot of variety. That's the one they gravitate towards. And again, I know for a fact it's because they recognize it. And that same thing happens when I do these tribute figures. When I do a tribute to, say, Boba Fett, which we're going to look at in a few moments, and I post that, he's not just some nameless knight that I've created, or some barbarian or warlord or whatever. He's a character that people immediately recognize. And the way that I design them, it's intentional. We're going to talk about how you can create tribute figures that have that recognizability to them, but that also still you can put your own spin on, because that's what really excites me about doing these figures, is not trying to create a super accurate representation of the character I'm representing, but to put my spin on the design. And that's really the other reason I love doing this, is it's a design challenge. I mentioned before that I'm a designer at heart. That's my favorite part of the customization process. Yeah, I mean, I love the end result. I love holding that finished product, sharing it with all of you, and putting it in the display. But at the end of the day, that creative spark that I get when I sit down and I start to try to create something, that is my favorite part. And it's as exciting as it is to create unique characters and to have a blank canvas. As a designer, a blank canvas is sometimes a scary thing because there's so much possibility available to you that you almost don't know where you're going to go. Limitations and direction is actually really, really cool. I love working within parameters. So when I'm creating a tribute figure and I know I'm trying to represent something, that's an exciting design challenge. And it's one of the reasons I certainly like doing those. So when I create tribute figures, the ones that I like to do, so Eric actually just said something that I wasn't even aware of. He said that Sir Owain in the first series was named after O-Dog, who's someone that used to work at Four Horsemen Studios. Eric, I didn't even actually know that. That's a piece of information that I wasn't even aware of. So there you go. That being said, that figure wasn't made to look like Owen, so I still do maintain that Unkin is the first. I mean, when you say tribute figure, you can obviously say that, Pixis and Rhaegor and Lord Viserys, those are all tribute figures in one fashion for sure. They're named after certain characters, certain real people and so forth, but they weren't made to represent any of those people that they're named after. That's the difference here. So when I do these tribute figures, one of the things I try to avoid, and this is just personal preference, is I'm not super inspired to create tribute figures that already, for characters that already look like they belong in the realm of mythos. Case in point, The Witcher. I had someone reach out to me recently asking me if I could do a Witcher custom, and while I'm certain I could, I don't really get excited for that because that costume, the Witcher costume, whether it's from the Netflix series or whether it's from the video games, it already fits very well within this universe. Same thing with like Game of Thrones. If I was going to do a Game of Thrones homage, I'd probably use Game of Thrones pieces, and that feels kind of cheating to me. I don't really want to use pieces from a Game of Thrones character to make a Game of Thrones character. That kind of minimizes the design challenge for me a little bit. So what I really enjoy doing is creating characters that don't belong in the realm of mythos, like Boba Fett. Boba Fett in Star Wars in general, obviously it's such a wildly different genre than what we have for Mythic Legions, sci-fi versus fantasy, that being able to translate that character into Mythic Legions is something that I think is really cool. And to be honest with you, from a creative standpoint, you have a lot more flexibility when you do something like that. When you're creating Witcher or Jon Snow in Mythic Legions, they have to really look like those characters for them to resonate, for you to identify who they are. They have to look so much like them that I don't think you have as much creative freedom. When you create some of these other characters that may not necessarily belong in Mythic Legions, the cool thing is you just have to hit on certain key character traits to really be able to bring them into the line and for people to immediately recognize them. So let's look at an example of that. Let's actually look at the Boba Fett. So here I have a Boba Fett. This is a Black Series figure. So, this is obviously a stock Hasbro figure meant to be a representation of Boba Fett. Now, Boba Fett is certainly one of those characters, even though he's got a few different costume variations between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, different colored gauntlets and so forth. By and large, the Boba Fett costume is iconic, it's familiar. There's not a ton of different versions of Boba Fett. So this is pretty much what we're working with. So whenever I do a tribute like this, the first things that I do is I think about the character and I actually jot down what are some of the key design elements of this character. And I start with the most important ones. Like, what are the key things I have to hit? So with Boba Fett, the number one thing is the helmet. You've got to nail the helmet. It's got to have that iconic T-visor type helmet that he's got here. That is a key part of the Boba Fett design. So that's the first thing I've got to tackle. Some other points that I wrote down for Boba Fett are certainly the colors of the armor. Some of the pieces looking worn, looking, battle damaged. The fact that he's got this cape that comes down one side, that he's got the Wookiee braids, he's got the blaster, he's got the backpack with the missile that comes up. You can go the knee pads, the tools at the shins. There are all these different aspects of Boba Fett. You don't necessarily need to hit every single one. That's what I think is important when you're doing these tributes. You need to understand where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. You need to do the helmet, you need to do the color scheme. I think that if you do those two, you're probably in pretty decent shape, and the more you can add on, the better it's going to start looking and the more recognizable it's going to be. So check out this. So this is, you may be familiar, this is, I believe it's a figure by Bandai. They did a series, and they have a name for them, I forget what the name is, but they're basically samurai-inspired Star Wars designs, right? Super cool figure, pretty heavily detailed. I know a lot of people, when I did my Samurai series, they asked me if I used any parts from this line, and I actually haven't. I do have a handful of them, but these are kind of pricey figures. You can get them as bootlegs. All of mine are original figures. The bootlegs, I've never had one. I've heard they're super floppy anyway. These are all originals. I don't really want to bust apart one of these just to use like shoulder armor or something. But if you look at the way they design this figure, it's hitting on the design traits I just mentioned. He's clearly got that helmet. Now they've redone it to look very samurai-like, even though it still has the viewfinder. So, they went with that helmet. They even have, a jetpack on them. But they've tried to samurai, give that samurai look to the armor. They've taken those iconic colors, those iconic pieces like the shin tools and the wrist gauntlets and the weapons, and they've created an interpretation of this character that lives in this other kind of universe. That's ultimately exactly what I'm doing. So here's my custom, my Mythic Legions, and this is one of the more popular customs I've ever done. We actually saw, you might have seen this week, that Eric LeBron actually borrowed parts of my recipe and did his own version of this Boba Fett inspired design, which he got the recipe off my website. Again, that's exactly why I put it there. So people that do want to take a crack at these things have the listing of the parts that at least I used, and certainly photos. A lot of the figures I do my 360 shots where, it's all the way around. But that's exactly what I hit here. So you look at this, and realistically, this was not a super original design of my own. This was inspired back when the first Kickstarter was happening on the for Mythic Legions 1.0 on the old Four Horsemen forums. People had taken like line drawings of the characters and they were coloring them in different ways as part of the fantastic exclusive voting. And someone actually took the line art of the Blood Knight figure, essentially, which is, it's got this helmet and the horns, and they recolored it Boba Fett colors. And I remember thinking, that's really cool, that looks interesting. So about a year or so ago, I was playing around in the workshop, and I had some pieces that I could use. I had the helmet, and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to take a stab at it. I'm going to make my version of Boba Fett. If you've seen my feed, you know that I then went ahead and did all of his bounty hunter cohorts. I did IG-88 as an Iron Golem. I did Zuckuss as like a Mist Goblin, Forlom as a 4-arm Thri-Kreen, Dengar as a Wounded Knight, and Bosk as just like a big reptilian character. But it all started right here. So you can see I've got the face, and I've painted it to match that iconic design. Now another piece that's iconic for Boba Fett is the emblem he has on his shoulder. I thought that would be really cool to recreate. So what I did there, I used one of those skulls from the Orc Axe. Let's see if we can get it. And I glued some like horn pieces that were in my fodder bin into it, put a strap around it so it looks like it's actually lashed to his shoulder blade there. outfitted him. Like one of my favorite parts here is if you look at the profile from the front, he's got that sword handle that comes up out of his back. That's meant to represent that missile that you always see coming up on the Boba Fett character. All of those different pieces, I put little blades around his shins. I tried to hit on some of the key elements, but not all of them. A key element of Boba Fett is his gauntlet that's got the little missile-like weapon on it. I didn't do that on these. I saw Eric in his custom, he actually put like a little articulated icon throwing knife there. That's a cool thing. That was his variation. I decided not to go that route. And I've never had anyone say, oh, you're missing that piece, because this hits on enough of the iconic Boba Fett design elements that just at a glance you immediately know who this character is meant to be. And again, one of the more popular pieces I've ever posted. Leland saying World of Warcraft is his go-to. Yeah, the great custom parts in there. So Boba Fett is an example, I would say, of an iconic type character that he has one key kind of design that you expect from him. Slight variations over time, but you know what you're trying to hit. That's the process that I use. I sit there and I think, what are the key elements of this character? How can I bring this character into the world of Mythic Legions? In this case, I made him a bounty hunter. That's how I envisioned him being as well. But let's look at another example of a character that I brought in that's pretty iconic as well. And if you follow my feed, you probably saw a series that I did that were all inspired by G.I. Joe designs. So I called, instead of G.I. Joe, a real American hero, I called the line Sir Joseph, a real Mythonian hero. And what I did, it was a ton of fun. I did like 10 different figures that were all inspired by iconic G.I. Joe character designs. And my favorite of that line was this guy right here. My take on Zartan. So, again, let's do the exercise. And you can do this at home. If you're familiar with the character of Zartan, what would you say the iconic pieces of that character design are? Go ahead, I'll wait. I would say the iconic pieces, certainly it starts with the face paint. The iconic face paint that Zartan has, in addition to that maroon colored hood. So these are some of the things that I would have jotted down. Face paint, hood, maroon specifically, like that color was very important to Zartan. A bow and arrow, that was his, he used a compound bow, but that was his choice of weapon. And then also, you look at it in some of the way that the actual Zartan armor laid out. The original Zartan figure was kind of a crazy design. He kind of had like a weird see-through shirt on, but it was a half shirt. Definitely a bizarre design. I didn't want to give my Zartan a bare midriff. So instead, what I did was I still tried to represent that by painting the top of his chest here. And by the way, I love this combination. They haven't done this in the line yet, but this combination of this top piece that's from the orc, it's basically from the orcs. The Orc Legion builder has this. A lot of the orcs have this top piece that's, that more rigid armor. But the orcs, because they're meant to be smaller, they have the really small midriff piece. This one here is like the elf midriff piece that has the buckles. I love that combination, how they go together. I use this on another one of my elves, my storm elf. I just think it looks wonderful. But what I did with that was I painted that chest plate, I painted this shoulder armor to represent the way that the actual Zartan armor looks. And instead of giving him a bared midriff, I at least gave him a different looking midriff. And then I painted different pieces on him with that kind of maroon color. I gave him a bow and arrow, and I certainly painted his face. Now I actually removed the face from the hood. I mentioned this last week. I'll mention it again in a future episode. I'm going to do some tutorials on how to remove Mythic Legions parts that aren't technically meant to be removed, like the heads from the hoods. but that was an example of when I did it. And then I also painted a second head for him that you can see here, that you can probably see a better look at his face paint. How cool is it now when I put remember before in subsequent weeks where I'd put the figures up to the camera and they'd just be all fuzzy and I'd have to say, oh, after the show I'm going to repost pictures of all these so you can see the better looking figures. Look how great these look. And in part you have Steve Busciotti to thank for this, by the way, because Steve, and let's be honest, he was gloating. He totally was gloating. He sent me a link to their Legions cast video the other day, which, by the way, if you're not checking out Legions cast, what the heck is wrong with you? It is awesome. The most recent video they posted, this is a little, sorry, I'm going to go on a little tangent here. The most recent video that they posted, I don't know if Steve's on tonight, but the most recent video they posted, it was just Steve and Travis, and they were talking, and Steve was telling the story of the first time he met Jim from the Four Horsemen at PowerCon last year. And it's a story I've heard before, but hearing Steve tell it again was so funny. And if you have to watch it on YouTube, because as funny as it is on audio, Steve, he just looks like such an eager little child telling the story. And it's even funnier because he's just got these gigantic meaty arms as he's telling this, and he's just got so much anticipation, and it's a hysterical story. But he sent me that video. Great video quality on it. They upgraded their camera, and it put a fire under my butt to say, I've got to improve my camera, I've got to do something. And I'm pretty excited about, how I can now show these figures, how you can see the detail on them. But that's what I did for Zartan. I followed that same process of what are the iconic character traits for this character? How would I recreate them in Mythic Legions form? Now, with Zartan, I did something else that I think is cool and worth talking about. With Boba Fett, I just made him a bounty hunter, which Boba Fett already is a bounty hunter. With Zartan, I tried to think a little bit about, well, if Zartan was in Mythic Legions, what would he be? Like, what kind of character would he be? I knew I wanted to use one of the 2.0 style bodies for him to begin with, because I imagine him being a thinner character. I didn't want to use one of the beefier 1.0 bodies. So at that point I said, he's probably going to be an elf, so let me explore that. And beyond just the character design of Zartan, I started to think about the other character traits that aren't visual. So Zartan, for instance, he's a master of disguise. He can change his appearance. So I started thinking, well, what kind of race in fantasy, specifically in Dungeons & Dragons. I'm wearing my Dungeons & Dragons shirt tonight, showing a little love to really how my infatuation with this line came to be, the fact that it touches on my childhood love of Dungeons & Dragons. But I thought about what kind of character from D&D could Zartan be, and I stumbled upon a race called Changelings. So Changelings are this race that, as you'd expect, can change their appearance. They can mimic the voice, the actions, the movements of any person, any race that they're trying to represent. And lo and behold, they kind of look like elves. They look like elves, but with this almost like ashen gray skin. And it just, like, this was one of those happy accidents, or those moments, those design synergy moments that things just kind of come together for you. And everything just came together where the kind of character that I wanted to represent Zartan as, the component pieces that I could use to build the design, everything just fell into line. And this is one of those customs that really almost built itself. It's a wonderful piece to work on. And it remains not only one of my favorite pieces from that series, but just one of my favorite pieces in general. Another one I did from that series was my version of Snake Eyes. And he's a little tougher to see on camera, probably because he's so dark. But Snake Eyes is always an interesting character to represent because he's typically, he's all dressed in black. While there have been certainly certain versions of Snake Eyes that have been brightly colored, I think that, I know that when I imagine Snake Eyes, the version I go to is version 2. The version with Timber, the version with the iconic visor. That's the version that I remember having and loving as a kid. So that is my definitive version of Snake Eyes. So that's what I tried to recreate here. And just like I did with Zartan, I started by saying, well, if Snake Eyes was in Mythic Legions, what would he be? You know, and I started thinking about like Ronin, like a masterless samurai. And I remember asking Dennis Derby, I remember asking him, like, I don't know if I asked him. I think I put it out on the Cabal. I said, hey, is there such a thing as like a masterless knight, a knight without a lord? And Dennis responded and said it's called a knight errant. I'd never heard that term before. So I made this a knight errant. And even though it may seem like a simple custom, and it certainly wasn't a ton of work, because it is all black, finding the right pieces to use to represent the character, I was very happy with what I did, starting with that head. You know, that head, which I've always thought is a cool head. This is one of the Knight Legion Builder, you know, Iron Knight, Steel Knight type heads. But the fact that it's got that single visor right across, that represented to me, it reminded me very much of that Snake Eyes version 2 visor. And then, I mean, just creating all the black parts. You know, some of these came black, some of them I repainted, but then I didn't just want it to be stark black, so I added a slight little bit of gunmetal to all the different rivets and the buckles and all the emblems that are on it. All of that kind of came together to make it so the figure just wasn't flat black, because even that version 2, it wasn't totally flat black. You had a few little elements of silver in him. But again, not a ton of work, but from a design standpoint, it hit on all the iconic elements that I needed it to hit on. That being said, I don't think it's so iconic. If you saw this, for instance, I debuted this and the Zartan at Legions Con last year. They were pieces that I showed for the first time there to attendees, and people knew who Zartan was, but they did not immediately know who Snake Eyes was. However, when they saw them together, they said, oh, that must be Snake Eyes. And that's another thing you can use when you do these tributes. If you do a series of tributes, like I did with Star Wars and with G.I. Joe, you actually only need 1 or 2 to look super iconic that people are going to immediately latch onto and know what it is. The other characters that surround it, you have the opportunity that they will be recognized by association. So that's kind of a cool little design trait that you can use, a little design tip, I guess. Drew, I gotta tell you, I was kind of embarrassed. I didn't wear, so Drew just called me Jeremy Guns Gerard, and they were making fun of me on Legions Cast for that. Oh, Steve, figures, Stephen Bisciotti joins after I tell the story about watching Legions Cast and how you seemed like an anxious, giddy little child telling the story of you meeting Jim. Steve, I gotta tell you, I was like crying at work watching that, because it was just so absolutely funny to hear you relate that, and you had this look of joy in your face. I also gave you credit for convincing me to upgrade my camera and, you know, improve this broadcast. So thank you, Steve, for that. So let's talk about some other kind of design things that you can do. The characters that I've shown so far, the tribute characters that I've shown, have been, I've referred to them as iconic characters. Boba Fett, Zartan, Snake Eyes. And when I say iconic, what I mean is they have iconic looks about them. Even Snake Eyes, who, as I've said, has had a number of different versions released, if you ask people for like what their version of Snake Eyes is, it's most likely going to be version 1 or version 2. It's either Commando or Ninja. That's kind of where they're going to go. So while there have been other versions, those are so iconic. But there's a number of other characters that I've worked on, a number of other tribute figures I've done that are for characters that have a lot of different versions of them. So, for example, when the Advent of Decay wave first came out, and we had access to the slimmer bodies and the female builds. One of the series I did back then were inspired by Disney princesses. So in turn, they were inspired by some art that I saw. It was some art that someone had shared, and it was reimagining the Disney princesses as warriors. Really, really cool art, and it made me say, hey, it would be interesting to redo some of those classic, iconic character designs as Mythic Legions figures. Well, what's interesting is all of those Disney versions are tributes and recreations of other characters that have existed in fairy tales and folklore and myth and legend and so forth. Almost all of those characters that may be popularized by Disney and are certainly part of the princess line, they had life long before Walt Disney ever got to them. So I tapped into some of those to create versions of the characters that maybe touched on some key elements but weren't so representative, because they also could play around with other versions. Example. This was the first one I did for the Disney-inspired line, and this is my version of Snow White. So, I made Snow White. I mean, if you think about the character of Snow White, she's got the black hair, she's wearing blue. Those are some of the traits from the Disney version. So I made it a point. Again, happy build here, that things just kind of come together. The Ravina figure that has that blue armor, that worked really, really well here. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. I clearly wanted to make her a warrior. So I thought a bit about other versions of Snow White that I've seen, and what I came to was the show Once Upon a Time, which I don't even know if it's still going on. I think it's done now. I hadn't watched it in years. I watched it the first couple seasons, so I remember some of those early episodes with Snow White being kind of like a bandit, actually, almost very Robin Hood-like. But she was a woodland character. She was a bandit. She was an archer. So I tried to tap into some of that here as well. And I gave her this jacket, which I frankly don't even know where it's from. It was in my fodder bin. I think I bought a large lot of fodder from someone, and that was in there. But something as simple as putting that on, giving her the bow weapons, and then popping this head from Delphina on it. Super easy Kit Bashy type build, but it represented that character for me. And talk about identification by association. You know how to identify her as Snow White? Put her with 7 Mythic Legion dwarf figures. Bang. Instantly, if you got 7 dwarves and a dark-haired girl, people are going to say, oh, is that Snow White? There you go. And that's kind of cool. So you can think not only about how would I create these iconic characters that have one specific character design, but also you can kind of do these characters, these tribute characters that draw from different versions of that same character, and then you can kind of put your twist on it as well. So, talk about putting a twist. This was another character I did for that Disney-inspired line. And this was my version of Ariel the Little Mermaid. And realistically, it doesn't tap into a lot of the iconic character traits of Ariel. But I mean, what are the character traits of Ariel? Well, she's got the red hair, and she's a mermaid. I didn't want to make a mermaid. A number of people suggested I should have done an alternate bottom for her using some Motu, I don't know, it's probably Mermaidia or something like that. There's a mermaid figure in Motu, and I looked into getting that, but I knew I wasn't going to display it as that, so literally I would have bought it just to have. So I ended up not doing that. But even just with that character design, having the orange hair, I gave her the trident, so I was like, oh, Triton's trident, I'll give her that. But then I started to think about other, I gave her this like tortoiseshell on the back because I figured, well, she's living in the ocean, she's queen of the ocean, she can be wearing a turtleshell background there. And there's not a lot of aspects of the character design that went into this, but still for me it very much represented that character. I did tap into some of the colors. She's got some greens and oranges about her, so I tapped into some of that. But that's one of the nice things, I think, when you're working on characters that there are multiple versions of, you can play around with it. And again, this is supposed to be fun. You know, you're not trying to win a design contest to get it as close to a certain character design as possible. You know, ultimately, if you look at that and you're just like, that's just a cool warrior, woman with a big trident and a turtle shell on her back, that's pretty cool right there. So even if you don't realize that it represents Ariel, the Little Mermaid, you can still have fun and do cool character designs like that. Mermista, David Hunter said. Yeah, I figured it was something like that. I said Mermedia. I knew it was something like that. So the last Disney princess type design that I'm going to show is one that I got really creative with. So I showed kind of Snow White, which didn't have a lot of customization to it. And frankly, the Ariel has no customization. There's no paint on that or anything. That's just part swaps. But one that remains, again, one of my favorite pieces from that series and just in my collection as well, is what I did for the character of Tiana from The Princess and the Frog. So I thought about that character, and immediately I was like, what the heck am I going to do for that? How do I make her a warrior? Like, how do I do something cool with that character? There was no defining character traits of it other than maybe the color green that I could really tap into. And then I started thinking, broader. The incredibly overused phrase, I start to think outside the box, but that's what I did. I started to think, what could I do here? And I wondered, what if for this particular character, for Tiana, instead of calling her Tiana from Princess and the Frog, I got it in my head to call her Tiana, Princess of the Frogs. And by frogs, I meant the bog goblins. So I said, well, what if she was like some kind of magical character, a magic user character that had bewitched the bog goblins, and they were her little mini army. And this is literally the design process I go to. I haven't started customizing yet. I'm just thinking through character design. I'm thinking through, how am I going to create this character? Because for me, and your mileage will vary. Everyone's going to be different the way they do this. I know there's lots of customizers that just like to slap some parts down, start painting, and see what happens. I've certainly done that too, and it's fun. It's cool. But this is, by and large, how I create designs. This is, by and large, what I do, where I start to really plan out the character. It's not only designing a custom, it's designing a character. That's what I'm trying to work on here. So I'm thinking about their story, and their story will help dictate and drive the design of the figure itself. So I'm thinking she's the Princess of the Frogs, and okay, well, if she's a magical character, how would that be? And then I thought about the other characters in that story, and I came upon the villain. So the villain in Princess and the Frog is like a voodoo priest type character. And as soon as I thought that, the pieces fell into place. I'm going to combine Tiana with the voodoo priest and make a voodoo priestess. And right out of the gate, there's a great base figure for that. The Hera Serpent Spire already has kind of that voodoo type look to her. So this is what I created. Again, one that I absolutely adore to this day. And in stark contrast to the last two that I showed that had almost no customization work, this one I definitely did a bit of work on. To try to take you through just the steps here, starting with her head. So the Hera Serpent Spire has the big, long ponytail that comes down. Didn't want to use that, so what I did was I removed this skull piece from the Queen Urxa orc figure. Again, an example of a part that's not meant to be removed, that with a little determination you can get it off. So I removed that, and then I used this back ponytail piece from Urxa as well, and I kind of recreated the way that her hair would look to give this skull-topped look. Hera comes with a big snake emblem in front. I removed that and instead used this little one that came with Lord Adon. It's got a very kind of bonish wood look to it. That worked well. And then I painted the skull motif on her face, which that's one of the key design pieces, because that voodoo priests, just in a generic kind of Halloween costume type fashion, have that skull-like face anyway. The character from Princess and the Frog had it, so it worked really, really well here. And then it was just kind of adding some other design elements. You know, I gave her the larger shoulder pauldrons because I wanted her to have a bigger look on her shoulders, and I glued a pair of those orc builder skulls onto the shoulder pauldrons to add more skulls to the design. This little necklace of skulls is from a Predator figure. This little skull-topped handle thing is from the little cane is from a 3 3/4 inch Game of Thrones rattle shirt figure. So I mean, if you're following along at home, you're probably starting to see that, okay, you're like 6 different figures into creating this one character. I'm not done yet. Also, the skirt she has here and the cape she has, I really wanted that gritty, kind of, you know, messy, worn look. Those come from a Lord of the Rings Galadriel figure. The figure was actually called Galadriel Enchanted or Entranced. It's the one that's the scene in Lord of the Rings where Galadriel gets tempted by the ring and gets all crazy evil looking, but then fights back and recovers. That point where she's evil looking, that figure of that scene is what that's from. So it's like a transparent material, plastic material that I painted brown for this figure. I mentioned in the past that I'm going to do a show kind of about the cost of customizing, but this is a perfect example of that. Hera Serpent Spire, Queen Urxa head. These are scaphoid shoulder pauldrons. These are from 2 different Orc Legion builders. This is from a Game of Thrones figure. This is from a Predator figure. This is from a Lord of the Rings figure. So just right there, I mean, that's like 6 or 7 figures. Oh, and Lord Adon for that. And granted, some parts I used one piece of them, but still, to recreate this, that it would take that many figures you'd have to buy. But this, I think, from a design standpoint, was something I really liked working on, because it shows an example that I hope, you know, I encourage you to embrace this as well. Take characters and try to do new versions of them. Try to imagine them in different ways and in different settings. You can have a lot of fun with that, and you can create some really cool designs that, once again, outside of the tribute that they may be, they just look cool in your collection. When I put her, you know, I don't, and actually this is a good point, while I display all my bounty hunters together, and I do display all the G.I. Joe homages together, all of the Disney inspired ones that I still have, they're not displayed all as a unit. Snow White is displayed with the dwarves, and Hera Serpent Spire, or Tiana, I should say, my Tiana is displayed with my Boggoblins, because again, I made her the Princess of the Frogs, so she's displayed with them. When you create these other characters that are different races, different classes, different types of characters than we've already gotten in Mythic Legions, it really allows you to add a ton of variety to your existing display. Something I love doing. I think it works really, really well. I'm going to read some comments before. I have a few more to show, but I'm going to read a few comments here. Leland's saying that Lost Helder on Instagram made a tribute to Wonder Woman that looked really legit. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I'll have to go look that one up. That sounds cool. People saying hello. Harley saying 3 figures being used right now for my current custom, but it all is worth it in the end. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead. I mean, again, I'm going to do a show down the road about the cost of customizing, but just to address that, I mean, yeah, it's expensive. I mean, the good thing is, you know, I didn't buy a Lord Adon figure just to rip that piece off his head and slap it on this custom. I probably had that in my fodder bin. I probably had that head in my fodder bin from using the body for something else. Your fodder bins, as you do more and more of these, your fodder bins are going to grow. People see me frequently selling stuff in the Cabal, selling weapons and heads and fodder pieces. Know that if I'm selling like a goblin head, I probably have 3 more of them in my fodder bin. Because one thing I have learned is if you have a piece in your fodder bin and you don't know how to use it, the quickest way for you to figure out a use for it is to sell it. Because the minute you sell it, you will suddenly have this divine inspiration to create a custom that is the key component to that figure. That is the key piece you would want, but now it's gone. I've mentioned before that I have legitimately had to buy figures for specific parts only, where I sold that figure or I sold that part recently, and I ended up paying more to buy it again just because I now have figured out a use for it. Incredibly infuriating, but certainly part of the hobby. So as you build these customs out, as you start pulling pieces apart, build out those fodder bins. I like to actually keep my fodder bins separated by component. So I have, a drawer for, I have like these plastic drawers that pull out. There's like 5 drawers in each unit. I have 2 units. So I have a drawer for heads, a drawer for like all the like neck collars, and I also put the helmet attachments in that same drawer. I have a drawer for shoulder pauldrons, a drawer for arms and hands, a drawer for feet and legs, one for weapons, one for waist pieces, and then I have a couple drawers just for like random stuff. Usually pieces that I pull off other figures, capes, pieces of fur, belts, just random things that I don't want to get mixed in with everything else, because the reality is using some of those pieces, using a couple belt pieces from a Lord of the Rings figure can totally change the look of your figure to make it look so unique, because it's not something that is traditionally used in the Mythic Legions line. I just saw Dennis Derby post a custom recently that used some chest belts from a Legolas Lord of the Rings figure. And as I was saying, I have had numerous Legolas figures with those exact belts. I never once did that. I have sold multiple of those Legolas figures, and I saw Dennis's version of it. I had never thought to add those belts to a Mythic Legions, and immediately I was like kicking myself because I had sold so many of those figures. That was a lost opportunity. Next time I buy a lot, I'm sure if I have one of those Legolas figures in it, which is pretty likely, he's pretty common in almost any lot you buy, I'll have a use for it. So don't throw away your fodder. It will come in handy. Byron saying, I'm going to attempt a custom one day. I only have a few legions, maybe down the road when I acquire more parts. Yeah, obviously, if you just start, you've only got a handful, it might be a little intimidating. But even something as simple, if you go back a few episodes, when I talk about head swapping and adding third-party heads, even something as simple as that, buy a painted head from the My Action Figure Customs, one of their painted sales, slap it on a Legion Builder. You'd be amazed at how it transforms that character. See what else we got before we continue on. Yep. Again, people just joining late and saying hi. David, no problem joining late. You can always pick it up in the replay. Again, I always post it in the video section on the Cabal, as well as on my YouTube page. If you want to find my YouTube page, it's just Mythic Customs. Just search for that and you'll find it. If you're so inclined, subscribe to that page on YouTube. It actually helps me get a certain number. I need a certain number of subscribers to change the URL or something. Additionally, if you are actually watching this on YouTube, please subscribe so you'll be notified every week when I do post a new episode. So a few more pieces that we can look at here. One that I brought out just because I thought it was interesting, because it was a super popular piece, one of my buddy Steve's favorites, but it touches on essentially 3 tiny pieces of a character's design, and it completely represents that character, I think. And I wanted to show it as an example of the fact that you don't need to do like what I did to Boba Fett. You know, Boba Fett, he's got the colors in the helmet and the skull and the weapons and the backpack. There's a ton of the design elements that are tackled there. You don't necessarily need to hit on all of them if you just hit on the right ones. So this is one I did. This is, I call him the Punishing One, and he's my version of what the Punisher would look like, Marvel's Punisher character, were he in Mythic Legions. And it came about largely because of this head, which is one of the very, very early My Action Figure custom pieces. I remember having that head, wasn't totally sure how I wanted to use it, so I ended up, painting it black and then, painting some of the chainmail pieces silver, but doing some white dry brushing on the kind of skull motif in front. And the minute I did that, I actually wasn't planning on doing Punisher, but the minute I did that, it looked like Punisher to me. Because again, when you think Punisher, what are the iconic things you think about? Number one is the skull. Well, I didn't want this, and I know they've had versions of Punisher with it on his face, whether it's a mask or like the Punisher version of War Machine, but that's number one. Number two is black. He's going to be wearing black, and number three, he's got to have a boatload of weapons. Hit all three. He's a Black Knight Legion Builder body that I kind of scuffed up and get some more detail on. I got the skull motif, and he is strapped with different weapons to bring the pain. Only a few little things. If you think about these characters, if you sit down, and as I said, I didn't start thinking about this before I did the head, but once I saw the Punisher in that head, I stepped back and said, okay, I've got the head done. How would I do the rest of the body? It was a very easy custom to accomplish, but when I brought that to Legions Con last year, he was one that I brought specifically at my friend Steve Sykes' request. It got so much attention at the show. Once again, people recognized it. A cool looking figure, and those I think elements combined really make people respond well to a custom like that. It doesn't have to be a ton of work. I say all the time that some of the pieces in my portfolio that are the most work don't get the amount of attention I expect them to get because of the work that goes into it. And then there are pieces that are quite frankly not a ton of work, but that's not what it's about. It's not about how much work went into it all the time. It's about bang for your buck. I mean, people see something and they just love it. Not a ton of work on that Punisher, but it represents the character well, and it does the job. And again, that's another design, I guess, just tip that I would give is when you're doing these customs, whether you're customizing tribute figures to represent an existing character or whether you're just doing a design, don't overdo it. Practice some restraint. You want to push that figure. You don't want to stop when there's still opportunity to make it even cooler, but you've got to understand where that line is. And this is some of my approach to customizing. I don't like customs that have so much done to them that they just, the minute you look at them, it's clearly a custom. They could not exist in the line because they use paint applications, they use materials, they use just a look about them that is not in Mythic Legions. Those are not what I enjoy doing. I do enjoy customs that look like they could technically have been produced. And that's one of the comments that I often receive, that I frankly love to receive, because I do it intentionally. When people say that the designs look very seamless, that these look like figures that could actually be produced, that is the highest level of praise that I can receive, because it is one of the key factors that I go for in all of my designs. A few more things let's look at. So, if you saw my Instagram and Facebook today, you saw this little guy. How cool is that? Let's see if it focuses. I put it up close. Come on, give me some focus there. Yeah, it's not focusing. There we go. Look at that. So, fun story about this guy. So this is clearly my version of Darth Maul as a goblin. So this head originally came from my action figure customs, and I love goblins, as you all know, so I ordered this along with a number of the other goblin heads that he offered quite some time ago. This was one that I frankly could never figure out how to use. It's super, super detailed. There's a lot of pieces with the teeth and with the spikes. I painted a few others with the teeth. Didn't love how it came out, so I just wasn't excited to work on this head. Well, recently I sent a few pieces to Zombie 13. He was nice enough to paint a couple things for me, and he said, hey, in appreciation of everything you do for the Mythic Legions community with the website and Legions Con and the Cabal and the show, if there's anything else you want to throw in there, drop it in. I'm happy to help. So I threw this goblin head in, and I said, hey, I'm throwing this goblin head in. Honestly, I've had it for a while. No idea how to use the thing. Surprise me. Whew. Did he ever deliver? I mean, not only did he paint it super cool, but if you check out his Instagram, he showed the work that he did. There was a goblin head like this that had a lot of spikes, but it didn't have the septum piercing and all the earrings. I had bought this one specifically because I kind of dug all the earrings. So he went in and kind of best of both worlds. He actually drilled holes in the 3D head, sculpted all of the additional spikes before he painted it with that Darth Maul look. And I love this because it is, again, and I've said this before, I was a toy collector long before I was a toy customizer. I like cool toys. I like getting cool toys that other people have worked on. The fact that Zombie sent me this head, that I had no intention of ever doing a Darth Maul. I was born in the 70s. My Star Wars is original trilogy, so the prequels don't hold the same kind of magic for me that they do for my, say, 16-year-old son. While I'm going to definitely do a tribute to Boba Fett, a tribute to Darth Maul was not on my radar until I saw this beautiful head, and then I said, okay, I've got to create a Darth Maul. And then, again, Darth Maul, what are the characteristics besides the head, which I already had? The black robes, the double-bladed lightsaber. Oh, guess what? There already is a double-bladed weapon in Mythic Legions. Works perfectly for this figure. Actually this is a Kylo Ren robe, a Lord of the Rings piece that we've got going on here. He's got like a loincloth from a Lord of the Rings, and actually the goblin body on him is a little bit taller. I didn't have I had put together a slightly taller goblin body to have some variation, and it worked really well here. But this I think is cool too, as an example of kind of when customizers work together. Zombie had an idea, he provided something for me to work on, and then I was able to kind of springboard off that and play around with it. So, thank you so much to Zombie 13, whose name is actually Eric. Eric is on the feed here tonight. He's on the show. I can see him. People are asking him how he sculpted the bones and everything, the horns, the spikes. He's answered that here. But honestly, if you are not following his Instagram page, Zombie 13 Customs, please go check it out. If you check out my page today, where I shared that, I tag him. Oh, just dropped something. I linked to him right on that post, so that is an even easier way for you to find his profile. So I've got one last piece to showcase today, and I brought it out because it's a little bit of a different tribute figure. Everything I've shown so far are tribute figures from pop culture. Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Disney princesses, things like that, Marvel Comics. These are all entertainment type properties that are fairly familiar. But what I'm trying to relate here, the design tips that I'm trying to share, aren't how to make a Boba Fett inspired figure or how to make a Darth Maul. I mean, sure, you can do that. But if you break it down to the lesson behind these particular customs, what I'm trying to share is a design process that you can use to create anything, any kind of Mythic Legions custom. It doesn't have to come from some pop culture influence type character. So this is one that I did a while back as part of my obsession with goblins. Now, looking at him, you probably won't immediately know where it's from. You would probably just look at it and say, oh, it's a goblin. This particular goblin was inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. Once again, why I'm wearing the shirt tonight. Everything is very deliberate. I remember spending hours as a child combing through Dungeons and Dragons books, specifically the Monster Manual. The Monster Manual just gave me endless inspiration to imagine these different creatures and characters, and absolutely wonderful source material. And I remember that first Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual, and some of the art in it was somewhat rudimentary. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons as a whole has a wonderful art history. If you're a fan of this, by the way, I highly encourage you. There's a book called Dungeons and Dragons Art and Arcana that is a massive hardcover tome that is a wonderful, wonderful book. Great artwork, wonderfully inspiring designs in there for some of the incredible artists that have worked for Dungeons and Dragons over the years. But back to those early times, they didn't have professional artists, and the book details a lot of these interesting stories. They worked with a lot of amateur artists. They worked with friends that could kind of draw. So a lot of the art in the original Monster Manual is somewhat rudimentary, and there's kind of a charm to it because of that. The image of the goblin in that Monster Manual was something I wanted to recreate. If you look online, if you Google, Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual 1, Edition 1 Goblin, you can certainly find it. But that initial goblin, this is what I tried to recreate. And when I posted this on my Instagram originally, I actually did post a comparison shot with that original illustration. But I looked at that image in the character designs, and he had a large nose, and he had like a spiked Viking-style hat. The horns definitely weren't this large, but he had a Viking hat. And he carried a mace, and he had a shield, like a wooden shield that had some spikes on it. And he had like booted feet. So I took all of those, and he had a loin-type piece. I took all of those design elements, and I recreated them. And ultimately it's a goblin. This is an example, we talked last week about swapping on new feet. This uses some Lord of the Rings feet that I swapped on and repainted to match kind of the boot area here. So instead of it looking like he had, just some shin armor on with these sandals, it looks like one whole piece. This shield, again, talking about where the pieces came from. So I believe it started as a snag body. Looks like I'm not sure if the gauntlets are from something else. I don't think those are the ones that came with snag. Feet are from a Lord of the Rings figure. Loin is from a Lord of the Rings figure. Shield is from an old Lord of the Rings figure. This was actually by an old line called Toy Vault, long before the Peter Jackson movies. The spiked ball here, I needed to make a little mace. This is actually a spike ball piece that's from the weapon end of one of the Gothotropolis Ravens figures, with just like a peg of one of the spears. I think I broke it, slapped it in there and repainted it. And then this helmet comes from a very old Warcraft figure. But putting those pieces together, I followed the exact, even though this isn't a pop culture, this was based on an illustration in a 30-year-old book. I used the same process. What are the key design elements that I'm trying to recreate? What are the key design elements that I'm trying to hit? And then what component pieces do I have in my fodder bins, or can I go hunt for on eBay in order to create this tribute figure? And there you go. That's kind of my lessons for tonight. Again, not super heavy on actual hands-on tips. I will do stuff with hands-on tips next week. Next week I'm actually going to talk a bit about painting. Painting is the topic that everyone seems terribly interested in. Outside of maybe sculpting, it's probably the aspect of customizing that most intimidates people. But I will share something with you that Sherry from Four Horsemen Studios certainly shared with me. She's a wonderful painter. All those prototype pictures that you see are all painted by Sherry. And she firmly believes that anybody can paint. She has said that multiple times. She's said it on the Four Horsemen's G-Con broadcast. Anybody can paint. You just need the materials and the patience. So I know it's intimidating. We'll talk about that next week. But for this week, like I said, I want to talk a little bit design theory, kind of take you through some of my thought process and how I create these designs, what I'm thinking as I produce these. And I thought it would be fun specifically to show how I create tribute figures. So let's look at some comments here. We're getting towards the end of the show. People just saying, a lot of people admiring Eric Zombie 13's work on that head. Yeah, well deserved. CJ, yeah, thanks for joining. Mike Wells saying, I love that old school D&D art. Yeah, I've done a few actually. I'm trying to think which other ones I've done. I mean, obviously I know that I did, I just showed the Goblin. I've done a few others. I know that I had been planning out some of the other like old school art, like D&D type art. I know a lot of people, I've been seeing more and more people do like some of the classic toy designs. I mean, obviously the Warduke. A lot of people did Warduke, myself included, in the first Mythic Legions wave, using like an Atlas figure with the Gorgo style head and bat wings from a Barbarian builder. And then when the Rhaegor figure came out, that included not only the pieces, but also like the colors that would really make a good Warduke. That was pretty cool. So those are really popular. And I've seen people doing other versions of those characters as well. So a couple people do some really cool Melf, like the elf figures. So there's been a bunch of them, a few of the female cleric and the gold. But as cool as those are, yeah, those original character designs, those original, monster designs, that's it. D&D, again, I've said this at length, but that universe, that I don't know, that property provides so much inspiration for me, creating new character classes, new monsters, new races. That's one of the things, that's the kinds of customs I most enjoy working on, for sure. So big time D&D fan. Amy saying, love Lord of the Rings Toy Vault. Yeah, I've actually used Lord of the Rings Toy Vault figures on a few of my customs. You can get them pretty cheap, and they've got some surprisingly cool parts. They actually, they're interesting. They're obviously they're made based more on the original book descriptions of the characters, which I'm sure lots of people appreciate. That's really their version of Lord of the Rings and prefer. David say, how did you get the boots on? Are you referring to the boots on the Goblin, I assume? So I covered this last week, but I did a quick tutorial on it. All I did was these, pretty much any kind of boot that you want to use, any kind of further than one on to Mythic Legion figure. If you up Legion's figure, you pop the foot off the ankle, you're going to see that ankle peg. That little ankle peg and the way the foot, the actual Mythic Legion's foot goes on there, that's kind of what you're looking to recreate. So any other foot that you use, when you remove it from a figure, some Lord of the Rings figures already come like with a hole right in the middle of them. Others have like a round disc up top that I slice that out to make the rounded little area that I'm going to need the ankle piece to fit into. Then what I will do normally is I'll take a drill with a little small drill bit and I'll actually drill a hole right in the front of that foot. In this particular case, that foot has a giant opening. I literally just kind of pegged it right in This one just happens to fit perfectly right in. It's almost uncanny how it does. But for the most part, whenever I do swap out feet, that's the process that I use. I modify the foot to look as close to a Mythic Legion's foot as possible by cutting away whatever may be there in the ankle area and then drilling that little hole. Again, just remove a Mythic Legion's foot, heat it up, remove it from the foot peg, and you'll see what you're aiming for. Drill a little hole like that. It doesn't, you actually, I said last week, you actually want that hole to maybe be a tiny bit too small for the peg. That way you can heat the foot, make the plastic pliable, and then when you pop it onto the peg, as it cools, it'll have a nice tight fit. If you make the hole a little too big, you're not going to get that kind of grip that you want. But adding new feet to Mythic Legions figures, tons of bang for your buck. If you've got Uruk-hai figures, any of the Uruk-hai figures have feet that are super cool that you can use on orcs. I've used them on goblins, I've used them on bog goblins, I've used them on dwarves. You get a lot of variety because like the dwarves, for instance, pretty much all the dwarves have the same feet. They all have that little dwarven feet with the upturned toe in front. Slapping on some different feet to the goblins or to the dwarves can completely start to change the look of your display when you start to look at these large groupings of characters. It's super easy to do. More questions. So people saying they're hearing choppy audio. Ugh, that was maybe bad. Choppy audio. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm using the same device that I've been using all along, so I'm sorry for that. Now they're saying clear again. David saying feet are getting cut tonight. Good. So apologies if we had some problems with the audio there for a little bit. Hopefully we're back. We're going to be wrapping up in a few moments anyway. Any other questions? Anything else that you want to talk about before we sign off for the evening? One thing I will say to everyone is, again, my heartfelt thanks for joining me, whether you are joining me live, which I clearly enjoy engaging with everybody. The reason I do the show live rather than record it and then just post it to YouTube is because I do enjoy the interaction with everybody. So thank you to everyone who joins. Thank you to everyone. I understand, I'm doing this at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I know that that's not convenient always for people on the West Coast. Certainly not convenient for a lot of Mythic Legions fans overseas who are, sleeping at this time. So all of those people who watch this in replay, who catch it on YouTube, thank you all for joining. I think what's going on right now in the world, with all of these, pandemic illness, coronavirus fears, having an outlet like this, having a hobby that you enjoy, having fans that you can share that hobby with online, I think we need that in times like this more than any other. So thank you for allowing me to talk to you tonight, to, hopefully, if you are worried about all of the challenges going on in the world right now, hopefully, not to bring it back up, but hopefully the hour and a half that you spent with me tonight kind of got you thinking about something a little bit different, and hopefully it'll inspire you to go and start doing some of your own Mythic Legions customs, because that will certainly take your mind off it. I know that when I'm at the workbench and I'm working on some of these designs, everything else just seems to melt away, time seems to fly by, and before you know it, the weekend is gone, and it's time to start all over again. So, thank you all. Hope this all inspires you to do your own customs. I love seeing your customs. Love seeing that it's inspired by things I've done or not. With that, I'm going to sign off for the evening. Thank you all very, very much. Actually, I have a few other things to leave you with. About that. I have said this. If you were following this past week, was a little crazy. I did some cleaning in the cases, so a whole bunch of pieces. Hopefully, made some collectors very happy. to some pieces that love going to new homes. We're going to be treasure parts of those collections. Three is one piece, probably two pieces that I'm going to be selling this weekend, but they go together. They're a set. And they're in line with what we talked about tonight. They are tribute figures that I got it in my head that I wanted to create. I had an itch, so I scratched it. I made these figures, and they don't really fit into my display, so I've decided to offer them, and we'll see if they pique someone's interest, if someone will add them to their action. So I'll be Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on Cabal. Check that out. Other than that, I said I will be here next week. I think I should think so. Eduardo asked if I think figures will be delayed. I don't know that, but I can tell you that, factories in China are certainly struggling right now. I don't know the exact status of the Horseman's factories, but I do know that just in general, supply chain for a number of industries is being affected. So, there is certainly a chance that across the board, you're going to see delays on a variety of products. We'll see. There we got Drew with his same Mythic time, same Mythic channel. Choppy audio again. Okay, so I guess we're having some choppy audio. And with that, I will sign off for the evening. Thank you all very much. See you next week, same time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, Mythic Conversations. Have a good evening.